Okay, so the recording has started. And tonight we're very excited because it's war stories from the trenches. And as I was saying earlier, is that it's really good if you can learn vicariously. Then you can learn other people's lessons, and then when you apply it in your own context that you can do things in a way that takes into account those lessons. So that's for me the most exciting part about today, apart from the fact that I've always loved AI as being something that I think is going to change the world fundamentally, and getting ahead of that curve is a really good thing. So we've got Mike Keating and Ben. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to pronounce your surname correctly.
Eiley, sorry, I should have.
Cool. And Ben Eiley, who are founders of Attract.ai. And they've been able to use a bootstrap process to have some great success, and are pioneering the recruitment industry at the moment. So very exciting stuff, and certainly a company that you want to check out over the years to come and see how they grow from strength to strength. So tonight's all going to be about, I think you guys had a blog post that we stole the heading from, which is how we bootstrapped our way to 20 plus paying customers in 12 months. And yeah, very excited to hand over to you guys and absorb what you have to offer.
Cool. So yeah, as previously noted, I have the pleasure of talking about all the things that we did wrong, and to set an agenda, like a high line of the things that I'll cover. Firstly, I'll give you a bit of context as to who we are and what we do. Then I would like to talk briefly about bootstrapping as a concept, and then push into, with consideration for time, all the things that we did wrong without impeding on Ben's ability to talk about the things we did right, without absorbing too much of your time. So, and then I'll hand over to Ben, and Ben will talk about effectively like how we've, particularly like with an agile lens and with an AI lens, talk about some of the challenges and problems and technical and product challenges we've encountered and how we've kind of pushed through those. So yeah, high level Attract.ai is a recruiting platform, and we predominantly work with technology companies or tech-enabled companies. We work with a lot of product companies that are venture-backed companies that have quite a steep growth curve in front of them. And we also do a lot with tech consulting companies. And yeah, to address COVID very quickly, March was tough. April was tough, but I think ultimately, I'd like to say by design, but not. We've been lucky in that a lot of the product and or tech consulting companies have ultimately benefited from the current environment and the need for innovation and technology adoption. So yeah, we've had a very tough first half of the year, but a very good back half of the year. And yeah, so we work with technology companies and helping them build hiring engines that are sustainable, that are efficient, and that are very strategic and proactive and targeted. So this kind of feeds into the start of our journey. Without going back too far, I was an agency recruiter for too many years than I'd like to claim, and I knew Ben via that work, and we used to catch up a lot and have coffees, and I'd bitch about being an agency recruiter and how my family didn't love me and my friends didn't like being around me because I was a dodgy agency recruiter. And then Ben very kindly would then contribute about how much he disliked agency recruiters. So that was very good of him. And through those coffees, we started to really kind of bond and discuss hiring function, recruiting functions. And our key observation was that reactive hiring was very damaging to businesses. When you hire reactively, i.e. somebody quits and you need to hire somebody, or you sign a big customer and you need to hire people, or you raise capital and you need to hire people. When you hire in that manner, a fellow agency recruiter, I feel sorry for you. No, sorry. No, good to see you, and very good of you to claim that. Yeah, so we saw reactive hiring as very poor practice, but pretty much companies of all sizes and all levels of maturity largely recruit reactively. And when you recruit reactively, you're very limited in terms of your access to talent and the people that are active in the market at that moment in time. You're largely reliant on two incumbent channels, being advertising and agency. And when you're operating in this manner, you need a bum on a seat, and you're more likely to rush a process. You're more likely to not consider diversity, be that gender diversity, age, cultural backgrounds, what have you, and then also, like, from a cultural fit or cultural ad perspective, all these kind of things are largely neglected or ignored, because you need a body and you need somebody in as quickly as possible, because you've got a 4-week notice period, and typically the person you're hiring's got a 4 weeks notice period, and you're trying to get some amount of handover, and it's a disaster. And so what we learned was that a lot of people then typically lean on agency as a support, and recruitment agents are lovely people, ethical people, but yeah, there's some questionable kind of things that sit around that. So and it's obviously very, very expensive, and it's unsustainable, and it's not a strategy. So for us, it's like, cool, reactive hiring is the bad guy. What does good look like? And it's proactive, it's strategic, it's targeted, it's thoughtful, and it's understanding the skill sets and cultural considerations, or what have you, that you need within your organization as early as possible, and be mapping the market and building relationships with people that look suitable for upcoming opportunities, and then building those relationships, nurturing those relationships, so that even when you need to make that hire, you've got people ready to go that you can then hire from that pool of people that you've conducted more due diligence on, and you can be much more thoughtful and considered in terms of the people you bring into the organization. So that was kind of like the problem that we observed, and the opportunity that we observed. We could unlock this proactiveness and this strategic talent acquisition function. We could deliver a lot of value to companies of all different sizes. So how far back do we go? So Ben and I used to catch up for coffees. I had a quarter life crisis of sorts, and quit my job in agency recruitment and went traveling for 12 months. Ben quit his job as MasterCard was acquiring TNS, and he started doing dev consulting for that 12-month period, and we used to catch up on Zoom calls, not too dissimilar to this, and I'd be in some weird and wonderful hostel in God knows where in South America, and there'd be plumes of smoke in the background, and the connection was dodgy, and we'd talk about this idea and this pursuit that we wanted to work on. And then I came back from that trip 12 months later, and we started working on the problem. And yeah, this is where all the mistakes started. We sat in a room together, and we know best. Like, I know recruiting from an agency perspective, Ben knows recruiting from a hiring manager perspective. We know this problem intimately. We've sat on both sides of the table. We have the perspective, and let's build a solution. So Ben and I effectively sat in a room for 12 months working on this problem, high-fiving each other. Man, we're awesome. Man, we know this problem. Oh, we're building such a cool product. What color Lamborghini are we going to buy first? All these kind of very early stage startup conversations occurred. We built a truly stunning product. It was incredibly beautiful. It was very, it had a lot of functionality, a lot of features. It was very there was a lot of thought went behind it, but effectively it was Ben and I in a room, and he would release something, and then I'd play with it, and I'd say, "You're a legend," and he'd be like, "No, you're a legend." And then we'd kind of build upon this false sense of knowledge or awareness as to what we were doing. And the product, and you'll see on my LinkedIn, I've got it as was a co-failure in a company called Highly, which in itself was just stupid. It was a classic tech startup with a word that was spelt wrong, with a bad domain. People never knew how to pronounce our company. I would say that they would have had troubles putting it in their browser to go to the website, but I don't think any of them did. So that wasn't necessarily impactful. But effectively, we built this platform that Ben and I thought was going to be awesome, and we thought we'd release it to this fanfare and adoption, and it was Ben and I in this echo chamber, and then even we stopped using it because we thought it sucked. And it took us way too long to realize that. It probably took us like 12, 18 months. All those feelings are flooding back. And then, so yeah, we started on that in probably January, February 2016. We probably came to the realization mid 2017 that we were idiots. So then we were like, cool, what are the learnings? Like, where did we stuff up? And effectively, it was we didn't talk to anybody. We didn't talk to any prospective customers or users or conduct research. We were just running off the belief that we knew best. And if we built it, they would come. The classic kind of startup scenario. And I would say that even now, I read all the lean startup books. I was Paul Graham. I read all his things, and I went to startup meetups, and like we were naive, but not naive. Like I think we did, like, we're not idiots largely. We should have known better, but like, I think it's very easy to fall into those trappings and think you're making progress when you're not. So yeah, we got to the mid 2017. We were like, man, this is most definitely not a thing. And we had t-shirts. We were in a co-working space. We did all the things. It was, yeah, again, looking back, it's very funny, but we made all the mistakes. But effectively, like at the back of that, we were like, okay, well, we've proven we can build something pretty beautiful. We work well together. We trust each other. We've gone through a very tough period in our lives, and there's been little to no conflict. Like, it's been healthy conflict, healthy tension between us. Probably to that point as well, if there's any other like technical co-founder types in this call, like I was the non-technical and Ben was the technical, and I was like just the classic non-technical founder. I was like very enthusiastic. I wanted to boil the ocean, build all the things. And there was always like a tension that remains today. I always call it like a healthy tension, in that I want to do everything yesterday. And Ben's, as you'll see once he starts talking, is the handbrake on our relationship. He's the fun sponge of me doing all the cool fun shit. But yeah, I'd work very hard to like try and drive all those bits, and Ben would always be like, no, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. No, there's this thing called tech debt, or it's not. And I'd be like, mate, come on, just let's do it. Let's do it. I could see Ben's kind of smiling, but also there's some sadness behind that smile. So yeah, so then when we came to that period where we both were kind of in alignment and agreement that this highly, or hilly as a lot of people called it, was in fact not a thing. We went out and we started speaking to people and trying to understand the problem space much better. And then you would think this is the part where I hand over to Ben and he talks about all the good things that we did, but no, there's still plenty to come. So then we were like, cool. So our initial concept was like, if we build a platform that hosts a community of startup people, product people, development people, growth people, we could build this great community that's like again, it sounds silly saying it out loud, but it was like a LinkedIn, but more focused and a more curated community. We could get these people collaborating and sharing ideas, and it would give us a really good platform then to build something that could serve them, and we could commercialize it. But yeah, if you don't truly, like, I think the big issue with what we were building is like, we didn't care about the community bit. We cared about the potential of like commercializing something at the back end of that. And you need to care about what you're doing and be obsessed about that for it to be successful. And we weren't. It was kind of like a stepping stone for us to do the thing we wanted to do. so like if we built this community, then we could build a bunch of tools and products and what have you that could then serve that community, and we could build a commercial product out the back of that. But yeah, obviously no community means you're very limited as to what you can build out the back. So then when we sat down and kind of spoke about all the mistakes we'd made, we're like, well, what about if we can navigate building the community thing, and we can build a B2B product that can harness like some of the data elements and add value to employers and help them build these hiring engines. So then we were just guzzling the AI Kool-Aid. And so what did we do? We immediately went to the .ai domain registry and just started putting in names with .ai at the back end to work out what our new company was going to be. I should say we get a little bit of feedback that we made, like people talk about warts and all. We are warts and warts, like in terms of how we talk about stuff. Like we're not, we're very open. We're an open book. So yeah, so then we're like, cool, we're going to pursue this AI thing. We found a bunch of names, and Attract.ai somehow was available, and we're like, cool, we've got an AI business. We spoke.
Smiley.ai wasn't available?
You know, it likely was, but yeah, I already had enough stupid domains that I'd purchased. I didn't need another one. Thank you for that. That was helpful. And yeah, so then yeah, what do? We go, cool, we're an AI company now. We need data. So then we had countless questionable phone calls with very questionable gentlemen from Eastern Europe, offering to sell us all sorts of data of God knows what source and legitimacy and compliance, and we acquired some data through some channels, and then we got some great ML talent, local ML talent, and we're like, cool, let's try and build some models and glean some insights and build a product. And then we kind of, off the back of some of our learnings, we kind of built a kind of an MVP of sorts. It was effectively a single page search thing where you could input a LinkedIn URL, and then it would query our database, which we had some clustering in, and it would make recommendations of like profiles. And then, so again, then we were high-fiving again and talking about the Lamborghinis. And then, but thankfully this time we started going and talking to customers. We're like, cool, we've built this great thing, and you can input this profile and it spits out like profiles, and this is going to help you, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, very little interest again. So that was very heartbreaking again. And then from there, I think that was probably like a big moment for us. Was that of which we were like, cool, we need to actually understand the problem and talk to the people suffering these problems, and really understand like fundamentally what they need solved. And in doing so, that then has built the foundations of what we do now, which is very research heavy. Weekly, we're having multiple research calls with customers and or prospective customers to try and understand their talent acquisition function, their hiring engine, how they think about hiring, recruiting, the channels they pursue, the investment, how they think about fit, like role fit. And that's obviously been, yeah, I won't kind of push into that too much because Ben will probably tackle some of those bits. But yeah, so that like really, I think from there we were like, cool, we've kind of got an engine which we largely iced, and then we realized how we could add value in by providing like market mapping insights where we delivered leads. So we said, hey, customer, we think these people are good, suitable prospective candidates to you, and that kind of became the foundation of what we do today. Yeah, I'll stop talking on the producty bits now, but I will say just on some of the chats we had in the lead up to this was bootstrapping as a concept. I get there's a lot of other founders in market that I talk to, and they always give me a fair bit of grief about bootstrap porn. I won't go into the specifics of what they say, but they've like funded startups, and there's a lot of like, oh, you're so hot on this bootstrap stuff, and we are pretty hot on it, to be honest. But one thing I will say, re the bootstrapping is the interpretation. It's a trigger point for me. I see a lot of people that talk about the bootstrap startup, and I know that they've taken on cash in some capacity, and to that point, we've taken on some cash. So Ben and I funded the initial business, but it was not a huge amount of money. I think we put in 10K each effectively to kind of get it up and going. We have consequently, there's a advisor, supporter of ours who has given us, it's of sorts a debt facility slash convertible note. It's like an overdraft kind of thing that we kind of built with him because he's a great guy and he's been successful and he wants to see us win. And so we have access to, it was $100,000, and we could draw down on that money in $20,000 tranches effectively with 3 days notice. So it was like, it was a payroll stopgap. So if we knew we were going to miss payroll, we had the ability to draw down that money. We had the ability to pay it back. We now have another, so we, pre-COVID, we'd drawn down the 100,000, and then the guy called us and said, look, you need to have some dry powder, was his term that he likes referencing. You need some dry powder. So he gave us access to another 40, of which we drew down 10 in March for payroll. And we've got now an additional 30 sitting that we can access, that we haven't accessed. He's then extended that up to 200,000. So we've got an additional 90,000 that we can draw down on if required. But we've got money in the bank, but effectively we have the ability to lean in a little bit harder, knowing that we've kind of got that stopgap. So some people might not call that bootstrapping. Like, we have the intention of paying it back, and we have the ability to. We have money in the bank to be able to do that. But it is a funny balance between, you need to be like, we have people's lives in our hands. We have employees, we have prospective employees, we have customers. So it is a funny balance between, like, bootstrap as a concept is awesome, and definitely we encourage it because you need to be very thoughtful and efficient in how you spend your money and how you build product and how you grow your team and how you acquire customers. But there is a funny balance between, you then also need to be responsible and ethical, and yeah, the reason I share that, that's probably you're seeing inside my head a little bit there in terms of bootstrapping is as a concept is awesome fundamentally, and it drives a lot of good practices within startups, I believe. But there's also an amount of like responsibility that you have that we're very cognizant of, and yeah, we want to obviously be good people and support our people, because startups have such a bad name because they grow quickly and they're too aggressive, and then people get fired at the drop of a hat, and it, like, we didn't let anybody go during COVID when a lot of people did, and yeah.
Your preference for bootstrapping is more about keeping yourselves hungry and lean rather than just an aversion to sharing equity with a funder, is that right?
Yeah, we again, with transparency, I caught up with a mate of mine who works at a VC group. He's one of the partners, and he was like, oh, if you're doing these revenue numbers, you should look at getting capital. And again, admittedly, got a little excited. We sniffed, oh, we could get this money. Like, this could be the valuation of our company. Imagine if we could do that. And again, we pursued that for a period, and we got our deck together and started having conversations with people. We got some offers for capital, but once we kind of, when it got to pulling the trigger, we just felt that it didn't feel right, and we were fast forwarding through bits that were important, and additional headcount potentially in our position, like I think like to take on cash, you really need to know how you're going to spend it and how it's going to drive growth and really multiply growth. And I think we, at the point when we kind of got the money and the terms and the people and what have you, it just didn't make sense for us to do it. It's not an ownership thing. It's not a control thing. It's like, we feel that we do our best work when, like, and Ben will talk to this a lot, but like when we're not wasteful, when we're very considerate and thoughtful, and we're not just building shit for the sake of building it or because the customer says they want it or because we think we could sign more. Like, there's a lot of kind of gates that Mr. Handbrake Eiley builds into the way we build product. That means that if I come back and I'm like, mate, we need this, this will be, imagine if we had this, he then is a prick and says, well, why? And then I was like, well, because it's cool, obviously. And then, yeah, he doesn't cop that for whatever reason. And then we have to go out and do the research. And then effectively, once we pursue that function together, then we can go, actually, maybe we should do this. And how can we build it as lean as possible? Or maybe let's scrap that, and there's a higher priority task that we can do that can unlock value for our current customer set, which we have the ability to renew or upsell. Or let's build something really light that we can push out and that may acquire more customers, and we can prove it out and get a customer to pay for it. And then basically off the back of that, we can have some data points to determine if we should invest more in it as a strategy.
It's impressive you got some term sheets.
You didn't look at them. You haven't seen them. They were
without any clear plan of what you're going to do with the money. People were willing to give you some money. That's awesome.
If you have a good domain name, you can do anything, man. So yeah, there's definitely more bad things that we did, but Ben, I'll let you take over and now be the hero and talk about all the awesome things that we did.
Well, it's probably going to be, yeah, it's relative. Less shit. Hey guys, for those who don't know me, I'm Ben Eiley. My background, just so that you're aware, not 100% startup, as Mike alluded to. I've done my tour of duty in a few different corporates. So I've kind of seen, like, when I came at this, as Mike kind of said, like I wasn't, and I don't think Mike was completely naive either about how to approach things, in a way that would mean that we would still keep our feet on the ground and understand like what customers wanted. But yeah, as Mike kind of said, we didn't quite work out that way. And it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and then realize that actually, yeah, we're just building this for ourselves. Like, it doesn't really, it's not really vibing with anyone, and no one's really using it. And it was really funny in the early days. Like we were just throwing stuff at the wall and kind of just seeing like what worked and what didn't, which I think is important, because then from that we can kind of triangulate like what the product would actually look like. So Mike, just to give you a little bit of orientation, Mike's gone over where we've been. I'll go over a little bit of just following on the AI bits there, and the data play and where we are today with that. How we approach the handbrake stuff that Mike was talking about, so the gates, as it were, just putting a little bit of meat around that. Some of the more technical stuff, like around release strategies and things like this, which I think are as important. I think they kind of play in a lot to how one can approach the product side of things in terms of feeding into it, because it's all well and good having an agile product function, but if the delivery of it's not supportive of that downstream, then you're going to get stuck. I'm aware the audience may not be 100% technical, so if I do get too far and down in the weeds, that is my background. I apologize in advance. I did go through the deck in my content in advance and kind of weed out anything I thought, but no doubt there's still stuff in there. And then lastly, I'll go through some of at least one of the things that we've released and just kind of what they look like in terms of where we were, concept, release, and ongoing, etc. Just so you can see a little bit of something with that's not airy-fairy. So yeah, just following on from what Mike said, late 2017, I think it was, yeah, we had the idea to build up effectively a database. We figured out fairly quickly that one, no one's going to pay, to use Mike's words, like no one's going to pay for a shittier version of LinkedIn. And two, like acquiring data is actually very expensive, very hard in terms of maintaining it. You know, it has a very short lifespan. And you actually need a very vast quantity of it to do anything interesting in the AI space. I mean, they talk about, you know, like millions of records when you're dealing with neural nets, for example. And, you know, there's only tens of thousands of developers maybe in Brisbane, or like people in tech in Brisbane, for example. So within each vertical slice, there isn't really that much data there, which makes it very hard to actually do any kind of clustering or any kind of AI stuff. So we had to think about like how we could approach this a little bit differently. We realized quickly that we were going to invest a lot of time into this to get it to a state where it was usable without any kind of filters in front of it. So instead we were like, well, look, what's the actual problem we're trying to solve here? Can we just try and sell that? And if we break even on the sale, that's great. And then from there, it's all gravy in terms of improving, you know, our margins and things as we improve, you know, the tech behind the scenes. Effectively, that's what we did. And funnily enough, so we kind of moved away a little bit from the AI stuff. And I noticed like Mike's pitches, for example, changed, not significantly, but they sort of started moving away from like, yeah, we're AI, we do automated blah, into solving the actual problem. The AI is there and it's in the background, it does its thing, but it's functional, you know, like it's a tool that we use for solving problems. And that allows us a little bit of flexibility in terms of the quality. John, to what you were saying earlier on, you know, like the generation stuff, language generation, interpretation, it's not really there yet. Like it's not great. It's surprisingly good, but in terms of being, what we've found is it's humans, when it's wrong in ways that humans aren't. So it kind of falls into this uncanny valley where, you know, you look at it and it's like Mark Zuckerberg, like kind of looks human, but there's just something not right there that makes it look even more Android than what a robot does. And so consequently, yeah, we use it, and we figured out that if we can put a human in front of that to smooth over those edges, and then use the AI, and then effectively just build the AI up behind the humans, to the point where the humans aren't doing a whole lot. You know, it's basically just double checking what goes out the door. Yeah, we'd get great efficiencies, and we'd build out the tech without having to compromise the actual business. So we wouldn't go into this hole where we have to spend a massive amount of capital before we got anything out the back end. And it's possible that wherever we land with that wouldn't be where the market is anyway. Yeah, so sorry, just to put, because I know everyone asks us this and AI and stuff, I won't go into details. Like we do have some there in the background. The big insight that we got, I guess, from the mistakes that we made, which Mike didn't touch on, but I think is quite important. They were mistakes, but we learned a lot of stuff along the way with each of those. And you know, it's very hard to predict often like what stuff you're going to learn ahead of time when you do this, and you do just often have to try things. And as much as I probably Mike thinks I'm a handbrake, you know, sometimes even I have to just go like, you know what, I'm 90% sure this is where it is, but I'm happy to be wrong. Let's just try this and see where it lands. But yeah, one example of that, back in the early days when we were building the community, we had this great insight where people, the data may not be there in terms of what a great person looks like, because most people don't put interesting stuff up on their profiles, but what they do is interact with other people, and those interactions actually portray usually a lot more about the person than the stuff that they present forward to the market. So we sort of figured, well, if we can look at that data instead, we probably will get some interesting and you know results, I guess, from the queries that we're doing on the data sets. And yeah, so effectively, like we look at connections and things like this, and how people interact with each other. Like tends to attract like. Good people tend to cluster together. Someone's worked for Google, you kind of know what gates they've been through in terms of what quality of candidate they are. So you can actually determine quite a lot from that, which I think is a little unique. There's a few other bits there that we layer in on top of that. and that, you know, we're uniquely positioned just with the data that we receive to be able to look at. So yeah, that's the whistle-stop tour of the AI stuff. If there are, actually, I didn't mention, if there are any questions along the way, please do stop me. I'm more than happy to go into more detail and or fill in any gaps.
Ben, I do have a comment. It's awesome to see that you've been trying to keep it lean in that sense, that you don't actually build a lot of the AI stuff, but using what's it, the Wizard of Oz method to really start to test things out and do things manually. So later on, if you can actually see that there's real value in that for your customers, that you can actually continue to build on it and start to automate it.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't necessarily say fake it till you make it, because like we did and do have elements there. But yeah, what we've found is, you know, like where before it was say 50%, you know, like we're slowly building that up, and you can see that in I think actually in that article, you know, there's a graph there and that I put together where you can see like our sourcing times have drastically reduced over time as we've sort of built out more and more tech, you know, like yeah, I think it's down to like 30% of what it originally took in terms of time to get to deliver to customers. So yeah, certainly it allowed us, you know, software is expensive. It's hard to change. So, you know, I came at it and I was like, well, look, if we can write 0 lines of code here before we start, that'd be great, because, you know, it's less I've got to delete later on, less effort for me up front, and at least we can sell them. We can still deliver. We can make it look like it is. That was probably the first 3 months or so of our 2 months maybe of our existence, and then we landed some large clients, and we're like, look, actually, you know, this is a thing. It's going somewhere. Let's start building it out. And we just slowly picked off the lowest hanging fruit as we went. Which actually leads me into the next topic, which is like how we approach and the mindset behind a lot of our stuff. So because we are bootstrapped effectively, we do tend to be lean. I mean, it is a tough balance between going out and building everything and having people just working on stuff, and at the same time, you know, building things that are going to deliver value. Typically, the way we look at it is, yeah, as I said, like the things that are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of easy to develop, but at the same time, obviously deliver the most value. The ideal ones are where we can deliver. How can I say this? We can solve multiple features with one change. So, or multiple problems, I guess, with one change. So often we've got a massive backlog of changes there. Often the actual priority order there will loosely be, or like it'll be organized by priority order. But usually what I'll do as a dev is I'll just look through and I'll go, this one's hard, this one's hard, this one's hard. This one's actually really easy. And like I know the people there are going to get, you know, they're screaming for it. So let's just roll that out. Often the ones that are really hard, and you know, when Mike, just to give, I'm going to give away too much secret sauce here, Mike, but like often when it's not quite a handbrake, but often, you know, like when the guys will come up and say like, hey, let's do this. The no is not necessarily around whether or not it's a good idea. Like often, yeah, like it's, you know, and there's some ideas we've got in background at the moment that we're kicking around. It's like, it's not necessarily bad. It's just that there may well be things that we build soonish that make those things super easy in a short amount of time. So I'm just trying to think of a couple of examples, concrete ones. So we had, for example, Mike was talking about adding, we were wanting to add like notes to each candidate. And, you know, at the time we didn't have any data structures around that. We didn't really have any tooling or any kind of system around it. And there was some other feature, I can't remember what it was. I think it might've been file upload. And we kind of accrued like 2 or 3 different things. And we're like, actually, if we align all of these together, we can solve this really elegantly, and we can come up with a solution that actually means that, you know, like we basically nail 3 birds with one stone here. You know, like if I build this data structure, it's actually able, it's not a Frankenstein of like bits bolted on. Like the 3 features we needed, which were being able to send out the outreach messages, being able to upload files, and also being able to add notes. And these all actually have common thing to them, like in terms of the data structure. So I'll just build that. And then all these things suddenly come in for free. So, you know, like a feature which, you know, individually, each of those, if we'd just come in and gone, no, just build it, we don't care, you know, a customer needs it. You know, each of them individually might have taken, say, a week to build. So that's 3 weeks total build time. Whereas actually the build time cut down significantly because we did a 1 week refactor. And then each of these other 3 things, I won't say they were free, but like, you know, it might have been like a day each. So, you know, you've gone from a 15-day set of changes down to 6 days or 8 days effectively. So it's effectively halved it. The other half of it is that you walk away with code that's much cleaner, more maintainable. You know, like the solution itself is kind of elegant. You know, like it's fit for purpose. It does what it needs. You don't have these horrible edges built into this thing that you've got to maintain going forward. So it's a much nicer experience from my perspective because, you know, I'm not sitting there wrestling with this thing and this horrible beast that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like each time we add a feature, like ideally, and this is not exactly how it works out, but like ideally I'm trying to make it better each time. There is a lot of, as one does, technical debt accrued in there, but it's manageable, and it's in places where there tend to be a lot of changes happening anyway. So, you know, like our sign up flow, for example, we're about to go through and do a big change in there because we've kind of, it's starting to crystallize in terms of what that looks like and what we need out of it. So it's like, now's the time actually to go and not throw it all out, but like we'll basically put it aside and then pick the bones out of it and then rebuild it in the shape that we need. Because the cost of doing that's now the cost of making changes to this thing is just becoming prohibitive. And it's because it's changed so many times.
So Ben, drawing on that, how granular were your conversations that you'd have with clients? So when they say, well, we need X, do you go and say to them, well, you know, let's go and explore your sort of problem space? Or do you keep it quite granular and solve a small problem for them? And then the sort of connecting bit on that, talking about what you I mentioned now, was how do you make sure that what you produce then is sustainable for those, especially when you have different developers, for example, maybe tackling different parts of the code over time?
Look, I'll be honest. I mean, obviously, I'm in a unique position because we have a small set of developers. There's myself and then a few part-time people that work on it. So it's much more manageable. I feel like having said that though, I've had several situations like that in corporate life, and I've kind of felt like, you know, like I've been able to do a similar thing. Like, hey, actually, you want this? There's this other refactor that the architects want. Like, if we do that first, it's actually going to make these other things we've got on the roadmap much cheaper. And often what will happen is like if the developers aren't involved in those conversations early on, the people in product, business analysis, etc., they're not, you know, like they're not aware. Like there's no way they could be aware that that's a thing and that opportunity exists. So it's a balance, because like sometimes, yeah, like a thing does need to just get out the door and be done, and we do have that occasionally. But you know, I'll freely admit, like the percentage of it is probably higher with where we are and the situation we're in than what it would be with a large team. But I feel like it's quite analogous. In terms of the granularity of the conversations, look, they do tend to get quite granular, and obviously, you know, when you're talking to, again, being smallish, like we're lucky because there aren't that many barriers within the team. You know, the customer success has a very high they talk, you know, customer success and product have a very strong relationship between each other. You know, they interact a lot. They're talking to each other, and quite often product is involved in the conversations, the CS conversations with the customer. And we'll sit there and go, well, actually, you know, even if they're not aware that there's a problem there, you know, you can kind of sense things, go, actually, like there's this thing here that might help you. What if we did this? And conversely, like often the customer will say things, if they're front footing it, to answer your question directly, it varies the level at which they'll give us feedback. And sometimes it can be as granular as like, hey, I really want this field here, or I want to, you know, like, can I do this? You know, like, can you change this in this particular way? To be honest, like those kinds of things we usually pull back on and try and understand very strongly, like what it is they're actually trying to do. because usually they'll look at it, it's analogous to what I was saying before about the refactors, like they're down in the trenches. They can only see, like a short distance away from them in terms of what they want and what they need. They're not aware that actually, hey, we're about to change this thing and this will probably actually solve your problem in a way that's even better than what you thought, or, or we're about to build this thing. If we shift it 2 degrees to the left, like actually that'll solve a bunch of different things. So yes, in effect, does that answer your question, John?
Yes, it does. Well, it's, so I guess I was thinking in terms of whether you would address say perhaps a critical part of a subset of the customer problem, or would you spend time trying to understand the broader customer problem before jumping in and helping them?
Depends on how urgent it is, I guess. Sorry to give a nebulous answer. Some issues are critical, obviously, and need to be addressed. Generally, though, yeah, we'll take a little bit of time and try and understand. And Nick, who's actually joined us down below, does a great job at sitting down and trying to understand like what it is that they're trying to achieve and trying to get out of it. And look, even if there aren't any higher level things we can pull from it, it's usually worth looking into, because we can keep it in mind in future, even if we have to do some dodgy fix or whatever to get it over the line. Having in mind what the original intent is can be very useful in terms of understanding whether or not we can remove a feature or not, or change a feature going forward. Any other questions around that?
I had one question around you talking about prioritizing MTTR over MTTF and deployment, and then also the zero minimal product testing. Those are quite interesting.
You've just read the next topic. So perfect segue. So look, so we do, and I'll just divert a little bit from that at first. So from day one, I was keen to get some form of continuous delivery in there in terms of, like shying away from the standard, or at least in the large corporate world, the deployment model where you've got a lot of bureaucracy and changes. A release is a big thing, and you've got to manage it, and you've got to, do all of this stuff. So from day one, it hasn't, and I guess you would even say like now, I wouldn't necessarily call it continuous deployment. Like we deploy whenever. It's any time of day, 5 o'clock on a Friday after a few beers even. It doesn't automatically go into prod. There's still a gate there where I've got to press a button, or like I've got to merge it into the main branch before it'll go in. We do have tests around it, and we're slowly kind of building it out. And over time, like as we get confidence around that, that's kind of where we're going. A few of the so with that in mind, it effectively meant that yes, we had to, or we wanted to prioritize, or I did at least anyway, prioritize not so much avoiding failure, because we're a startup and we're going to have to fail in some way, shape, or form. More prioritizing the ability to fix that failure quickly and respond to it, both from like a feature perspective and also from a technical perspective when things go wrong. Like if we deploy something and it's like, this isn't working, like it's nice to be able to fairly cheaply push changes, things out and get them in front of customers and test them out. Again, like having a tight customer success and product alignment is key to this, because it means that expectations can be managed. Like we can say to people like, hey, look, you had this problem. We've built this thing here effectively for you. Do you want to give it a go? Like we'll push it out, and then they're aware then, like actually it's kind of beta, like it may or may not work 100%, but at least, we can get feedback on that fairly quickly and decide whether or not to proceed with it. So just around like what, it'd be interesting to go into what enables that, and testing is part of that. So in terms of testing strategy, look, if I was honest, like I'd like to see a lot more tests in there, but unfortunately, like just it's limited purely as a function of time, and balancing time writing tests versus writing features, especially when those features are changing fairly regularly. So we're fairly strategic in how we do it. The API layer itself is tested quite extensively. One, it's very cheap to write the tests. They're cheap to run. They don't tend to be very brittle. the API doesn't tend to change as much. So in terms of value, like that's where it's at, and that's predominantly where things are. And to be honest, like if things go wrong in the back end, it tends to be quite catastrophic. You know, like you get stuff written to the database that shouldn't, or you get, you know, whatever. Front end test tends to be a little bit more not ad hoc, but like it's not as thorough. We tend to, and generally it gets prioritized on 2 dimensions. One is cost of failure, and 2 is probability of failure, and effectively multiplying those 2 things together. And then it's not as mathematical as this, but, you know, like looking at it through that lens. So as an example of what sits at the top of those, sign up and login are 2 big things that we test quite extensively. Sign up in particular seems a little bit counterintuitive, but like login is something people tend to hit once and then never again. So, you know, you've logged in once, you're done. The actual usage of the other pages tends to be a multiple of however many times they've hit the login page. It's not difficult to test as well. And every test effectively tests the login by proxy. Sign up obviously doesn't get hit. Not saying it gets hit with low frequency, but it gets hit with a lower frequency than the rest of the system. So if someone, you know, like for every sign up, when someone signs up, they're going to use the system n times more than that downstream. So it doesn't tend to get hit often, and the cost of failure is quite high, because if someone has a bad experience during sign up, that costs you dollars. If they're already on the platform, you can kind of manage it. You're not saying that it's great, but, you know, like the odd little glitch here and there is not necessarily major. We are now, I will color that a little bit. We're lucky because a lot of our, or at least historically, a lot of our users in the early days were quite technical, because they were technical hiring managers, which was great for me because, you know, like if there were glitches, they were quite forgiving. And often, even better than that, they would send me the fixes. So we had a couple of cases where we're like, yeah, line here, go have a look. There's something wrong with, you know, with whatever. Which was wonderful, having come from a situation where, and that sent screenshots and everything, but it's completely opposite experience to when people would just say like, I just used it and it broke, can you fix it? It's like, well, okay, like, I need a little more than that. So testing is one thing we use to help us in terms of, you know, having confidence in terms of pushing out early and often. We don't have any testers in house. We do a little bit of rudimentary testing if we know that there's areas that are going to be impacted. Again, like knowledge of the code base is useful here because, you know, there aren't that many people on it, so there aren't that many things, but you never know, like you change a thing in one area and it can often metastasize out into some breakage somewhere else, but that's less than what I've experienced in other code bases. The cleanliness thing that I spoke about earlier helps with that. One really big thing, there's probably 3 big things I think beyond testing that help us. Feature toggles is massive. We make extensive use of feature toggles around features that are a little bit unsure of, like whether we're not sure about what the usage pattern is meant to be or will be for the customer, you know, like who we want to use it. We may want to control that in the early days, and the parameters around that, and or if there's uncertainty around that from a technical perspective as to whether it's going to work or not. Yeah, feature toggles allow us basically just push out, not even care, it's turned off. We can turn it on when and if we need to. We've built a little bit of tooling around that as needed to be able to manage when the feature toggles were added, which is important. And also being able to turn...
Do customers get to toggle in and out of?
No, it's like a system toggle that we've got control of. And usually the way it'll look is customer success will have a chat to, or, you know, the CS team will have a chat to the customer and say like, you know, hey, we've got this thing, I'm going to turn it on for you. And it's kind of exciting for them because they're on the bleeding edge of what's happening. And at the same time, as I said before, like, you know, they're a little bit more forgiving of anything that goes wrong. But yeah, we effectively it's at the customer level. It would actually be there are instances where it would be ideal to be at the user level. We didn't bother building that in. It was complexity that hasn't been outweighed by the need just yet. But in larger large is not the word, more feature heavy applications, I guess you would say, that have been around a lot longer, like, yeah, that would be super useful. We're very conscious of making sure that feature toggles don't hang around too long. So some mistakes I've seen in the past are that I've done myself are, like you add a feature toggle, 12 months later, it's still there. It's kind of no longer a feature toggle at that point. Effectively, it's a system setting, and it's abusing it a little bit, which I feel is a bit of a mistake, because you end up then with these toggles, a massive list of toggles in the system, and like each of those toggles is an edge that you have to test. Like if you've got 4 toggles, that's not 4 different edge cases you need to test. It's 2 to the power of 4 that you need to test. So like it can exponentially increase very quickly in terms of the number of use cases that you've got. Like if you've got to test this one's on when this one's off, this one's off when this one's on. And so we're very conscious of keeping that number very low. I think at the moment it sits around 6 or 5. I think feature toggles that we've got in play at the moment. That's pretty typical. Like we try and bring it back as much as we can, and as I was saying, like aggressively deleting them from the system, making sure that they don't accumulate. Each toggle has a date on it, so we can see when it was added, and so you can kind of go through in date order and say, like, like, okay, this thing's off. It's off for all clients. I'm deleting the feature. Like it's going. If we need it, we can bring it back. But yeah. So the other thing we do, the third
on that around the features and switching them off, do you look at capturing the data to see what the usage of the different features are, and do you go to specific customers to introduce the features and find out what do you do to capture learnings of and capture data around the usage of different features that will provide input into if whether you leave it in or you add additional features?
Yeah, great question. Look, we use analytics, Google Analytics for that. So usually when we've added a feature, we'll have some way. Sometimes it's not possible, but where we can, we have data and events and things that push out, and we monitor that to see. So we sometimes go into analytics and check and see like what the usage patterns are, hand in glove with asking the customers and saying like, well, we can see the data here, but you've got to multiply that also by like how much they value that, which is a little bit harder to capture. Again, we're lucky because, like we're not dealing with millions of users. We're dealing with, tens, hundreds, thousands. So it's a little bit easier for us to capture that data in a very granular way. I think but 100% it's critical to being able to make those decisions. Because otherwise you're shooting in the dark and you kind of don't know what's going on. I mean, it's pretty black and white when the feature's turned off for everyone as to whether you can delete it because no one's using it. When it's turned on, it gets a little bit more interesting, and generally, the next point I'm about to make will run a little bit counter to that. But we do this thing called that we came up with called feature Jenga. I'm on the fence as to whether I want this thing to go to take off in other places or not. You can maybe take a guess as to what it is, but effectively we play this game, Nick and I, where we'll not take bets, but we'll go and just silently remove a feature and or turn it off. A feature that we don't think is being used. If we don't have data around something in particular, like if we've got the data, then it's pretty black and white. But some things, like it's hard to know whether, even if we've got the data, whether they actually care about it or not, or whether they're just, if there may be some way they can route around it that actually isn't that much of a divergence and may actually be a shorter path to what they're trying to achieve anyway. So yeah, we'll periodically go through and silently delete, like remove things and just see who complains. It's a form of data collection, and again, like you've got to be careful because, like sometimes, like a game of Jenga, like if you pull it out and the whole house falls down, you're done. But we take an estimated and an educated guess based on what we're seeing from what the customers are using and how they're using it, and we're like, like we've got this snooze feature here. I haven't seen any data, like I haven't seen anyone in the database use this very often. Like I'm just gonna remove it quietly and just see if anyone notices it gone or anything, of both internal to Attract and amongst customers, I'll I'll say. So I feel like in some ways, like we know other businesses, other startups, for example, not to throw funded startups under the bus too much, but like I feel like when they have a lot of money, they'll go and just build features. You've got a team of devs there; they've all got to be busy. Let's just build stuff, and so you end up with this plethora of features that really don't, people don't use. Like we've heard stats from some businesses, it's like 80 to 90% of features aren't used. Which is like one, that's a lot of baggage to be carrying in terms of the development cost, and also in terms of the cognitive load of the users. Which bits do I actually care about here, and what goes on? So we've been very mindful of building something that's as cohesive and as possible around like the user experience, and not having too many bells and whistles, and keeping it to the point where, like if there are there are other tools that they can use to do this, and Attract is just one of those, and it sort of fits into an ecosystem, as it were.
Yeah, I really like that, Ben. Is the focus straight from the get-go is only build features that are valuable to your customers, and get that information back. And I think it's one of the learnings that you mentioned is, we were building a product for ourselves, which we thought was absolutely awesome. But yeah, you're not going to pay yourself either. So
no, well, yeah, no, exactly.
Value in that sense. So trying to keep the complexity of the product low and focus on features that are highly used and improving those and making them better. I think
you've heard the story though about the guy who developed the word processor. So 90% of features don't get used. So he wanted to build a really simple word processor. Who needs a word count? Only 5% of users use the word count feature. So he didn't build one. And he couldn't understand why journalists weren't writing about his word processor. Well, it's because they couldn't count the words in their article, which is absolutely essential if you're a journalist. So they never used his word processor. So,
look, and I think just very quickly, that's why I think like those stats are very useful, but they need to be multiplied by the actual importance to the user of what that feature is. And like by and large, you can't do it without data. You need data. That second metric is a little bit harder to anticipate, and often there can be things there. There can be features which are highly trafficked, which is actually an interesting segue into the example that I've got up next, which are highly used, but actually there's better ways, it can be tricky to kind of figure out what that is and what it looks like.
And I imagine sometimes you'd have an issue around time-dependent events. So, for example, if you see no one's using the text time features, and then you realize that towards the end of the year, all of a sudden, everyone's expecting it to be there, but the feature's not there anymore.
Yeah, well, yeah. Look, we again, we're very careful about what it is. We're not careful, but like we stick very closely with the customer in terms of getting feedback from them, and finding stuff out. And again, we're lucky in that sense because we don't have, like, the team is quite tightly knit, from dev, sales, product, CS, all operational bits kind of fit together very tightly. And so the feedback loops, very, very short.
So Ben, on that, so what sort of number of customers do you have a really strong relationship with, and what sort of, how would you call that relationship? Is that like a co-design, or how do you see that?
Yeah, look, so by the CS guys catch up, I think it's every fortnight, sometimes weekly, sometimes more frequent, when they're just starting out. There is a process around that which I couldn't articulate to you definitively, but it's I think it's weekly for the first 2 weeks, and then it's fortnightly after that, and then I think it drops to monthly after a period of time. So it kind of tails off after they drop off. So they are in touch periodically with, most people, most past customers. At any one time, I think the numbers, actually I did a count this morning. I think it's somewhere around 10. I think. that's customers, that's not users. And that's like active. So they're, like they're being actively serviced. The actual number that are in play is bigger than that.
Yeah.
Those are just ones that are like immediate, if that makes sense. In terms of ones that we're getting, but it gives you an order of magnitude, like it'll be in the tens, I guess, in terms of ones that we're getting data points from.
Do you release features and that kind of stuff to those 10 customers or a group of those beforehand and get that feedback before you take it out to the bigger group, or how do?
Yeah, it depends on what it is, to be honest. Some things like we'll just push out. Some things like if there's a small subset. So there was a feature that we added last year actually, and we wanted to be very careful about who we gave it to, because the usage pattern for it may damage the way that people use the platform. But we knew that for a certain subset of users, it was going to be extremely powerful. So that obviously was controlled, and we're still kind of working out what the parameters are around that as to when it should be enabled, and then at some point, we'll automate that so that it it enables and disables as needed. Yeah, so I'll just very quickly last little bit, I'll go into a change that we made, a pivotal change, I guess it was, at the time, though we didn't realize it. It was late 2018, I think. So and what that looked like in terms of inception through to rollout, and then post rollout, in terms of looking at feedback. So we, as Mike kind of said earlier, like our bread and butter is delivering candidates to businesses. And so obviously, like, the delivery is the portal through which they see Attract. And what we were finding was, to your point about data, like it's difficult because we don't have any. There's not really any reference in terms of like what good metrics are, because there aren't any. Like there aren't any other, or there are very few, and none of them are going to share. Competitors aren't going to share with us like what that looks like. So, we can't. We were getting stats. I think it was say 70%, I think, or 60% of the candidates we were sending out were actually getting messaged. So it's a little bit annoying, because it means we're doing all this like this work, or like these candidates are getting delivered and then they're not being utilized by the customer, and that means that their results aren't great either, because the more people you message, the more likely you are to get a result. Like a lot of the time, for us, like the sweet spot with a candidate, similar to the product stuff, the sweet spot is like a candidate that on the surface may not appear to be great, like they don't have a fully filled out profile, but at the same time, they are active and they are in the market, or they are open to working, with a business. And, those ones, our customers would look at them and they're like, well, this guy looks crap. Like, I don't want to, like you've given me 4 people here. I'll message the top 2, that I can see. If these 2 don't come back, yeah, maybe I'll message these ones. But, effectively out of a batch, it was about 60 to 70% would get messaged. So we were looking at it and we were trying to figure out how we could solve it. And at the time, the way we were delivering customers was delivering candidates, was in a list. So we'd send them basically that we'd have this view, and there was like a list of candidates that they had to go and message. And then once they messaged, they dragged them into the, to say or change the status to say they've messaged them. And at the time, it felt kind of good. And we were like, yeah, this is amazing. We've nailed this. It's perfect. It's as good as it could ever be. But sorry, Nick is on the call and I'm about to throw him under the bus. So please don't judge me. But at the time, he broke up with his girlfriend, and he came into the office one morning and he was like, hey guys, I've just had this brilliant idea. I've been on Tinder and I think we can get some huge gains out of this. And on Tinder, like, swipe right, swipe left. And he was like, but actually, fundamentally, when we break this down, the key learning here is the thing that makes people, engage more is the fact that you're only presenting one at a time, and you've got to make a decision on that one person. You don't have the choice of 4 people, and you don't get to cherry pick. Like, that is it. You have to action this person one way or the other. So it's like, why don't we do that with our candidates? And thus was born, well, colloquially in the house we call it Tenderview. You know, we don't actually have a formal name for it, but it's the view through which we deliver candidates now. And I mean, it's not like it's evolved significantly from that. So it's no longer, you know, you wouldn't necessarily look at it and go, you know. But yeah, the fundamental learning was like, hey, or the fundamental thing we wanted to try was like, hey, what happens if we deliver this thing one at a time? And I think at the time just thinking back, I'm pretty sure we may not have actually had feature toggles at the time because it was fairly early on, but we did roll it out. It was sitting on a unique URL that we only gave to certain customers. So we could kind of try it and just see how people liked it. Interestingly, out of that, I think our numbers, they skyrocketed. So it went from like 60 to 70% engagement up to 90 to 100. You know, like it was just, yeah, we were there. It was done. The other thing that interestingly, and did not expect this, that came out of it was that the actual time that it took people to consume them reduced significantly as well. So in terms of unexpected side effects, you know, like the time went from maybe 20 minutes, I think, down to 4 minutes or something in terms of, you know, getting through and actioning, you know, consuming that batch. So it meant that customers were having a much better time because they weren't spending nearly as much time on our platform. Paradoxically, like we're probably a little bit different to most in that the less time people spend with us, in some ways, the better, because it means things are working efficiently. But yeah, it was really interesting, and yeah, we were able, we measured it and we looked at it and we're like, actually, yeah, we're getting this. We can see it here in the analytics, like, you know, the times are shrinking down. So we rolled that out to everyone. Interestingly, in terms of managing it, just to the point where we were talking before about product feedback from customers, I feel like if we had asked customers, I mean, we were getting feedback actually from customers around this, you know, and a lot of them were saying things like, so that they're engaging with like 60%, 70% of the candidates, and it's taking them 20 minutes. So they were saying things like, well, you know, can't you go and just like give us higher quality candidates, or can't you give us, what was the other one? It's taking me too long. Can't you automate, you know, automate this a little bit more, like the messaging or something. And yeah, that all basically dropped away as soon as we introduced Tenderview. And the funny thing is, like, if you'd asked, like, the customers aren't going to say to you, yes, give me less features. Like, I don't want to see everything. I just want to see one thing. Of course, they want to see all of it. And the existing customers, of course, you know, that a lot of them were not upset, but they were like, hey, I just, like, this is frustrating because I just want to see everything. Like, how do I just see everything like I used to be able to? The new ones who didn't know any better loved it, you know, and the feedback we got was great. And it was good because it was kind of out of the way. You know, they weren't looking at it going, it's kind of no feedback was good feedback. You know, no one was looking at it going, hey, this process is grating, it's annoying, you know, that's getting in my way. Like, this Tenderview thing is good or bad. You know, it's just like, well, that's just, it's solved. You know, it goes away. I'm now focusing in on the actual process and what I'm doing behind that.
Funny, in the olden days, we used to print out, you know, you'd advertise, get a bunch of CVs, print them out, and sit and go through them one at a time. So what you've done with your Tenderview is recreate the recruitment experience from, you know, 1985.
Yeah, you look, that's not unfair. You know, like, if you think about how recruiters present candidates, like, often that's how it is. They'll give them one candidate at a time. Like, hey, I've got this guy, he's great, blah, and you have to make a decision then or there. Is he good or bad? So look, yeah, some of it, yeah, it played very nicely into that, I guess. It's not completely new. It's a very old concept. Unfortunately, it took a negative event, our product guy breaking up with his girlfriend, before we came to that realization. But yeah, we did get there.
I'm sure there's a psychologist who probably got a name for the phenomenon that you've built in. I'm sure it's got a name.
Well, semi-embarrassingly, our product guy has a psychology degree. So he should have, like, again, throwing him under the bus here. Yeah, but yeah, I'm certain there's some, yeah, as you said, there will be some phenomenon there for it.
I think it fits very well with the model and everything that you're doing.
Sorry, what was that?
I think it fits very well with the model and everything that you're doing, is continuously try and simplify things, your code, basically the user experience, trying to keep it more focused. No, it's interesting to see some of those learnings along the way that you're sharing. It's fantastic.
it's kind of that same mindset, I guess, throughout the system.
It's I feel like we're getting a toolbox of really helpful patterns that we can just say, well, in this situation, it's something similar to what you guys have been to, and we can apply that. I'm just looking at the time at the moment, and I think we have gone about 20 minutes over the time that we'd set aside. So I'm thinking what we could probably do, if you're willing to stay for a little bit longer, is we could maybe close the official meeting and then allow you to continue with the last bits that you wanted to do, and maybe take a couple of questions if you want.
Yeah, sounds good. Look, I'm open to questions. That's actually pretty well the end of it. I've covered everything. It's perfect timing, John.
No worries at all. So what I'll do then is I'll close the meeting, and thank you guys for I think a really insightful presentation, in the sense that it's really provided a broad brush of all of the sorts of things that people are likely to encounter when they go through the same sort of experiences that you guys have. And I think there's been so many bits of nuggets of gold that when you've spoken about them, like the feature toggles, increasing testing, and the feature Jenga, and the relationships that you have with customers, and so many different things that I think are going to be so valuable. And and also, if you can pass that thanks on to Mike as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was really great hosting you guys tonight.
It was fantastic it was fantastic being here. Thanks so much for organizing it, guys.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess we'll let the people go that need to rush off to kids and dinners and that sort of thing. And I don't know if you want to stay on the line for a little bit longer to take any questions, or...
Yeah.
Right, guys. So I'll open the floor, and any questions for Ben?
You've got a small team of developers. Are they all based in Brisbane? Or have you considered outsourcing, and have you found all the talent that you need to in Brisbane?
That's a can of worms. To answer your question directly, yes, everyone's in Brisbane. I find it very difficult working remotely with devs. Of course, 2020's forced a hand on there, but we did consider it. We have looked at Philippines. We've looked at other places. To be honest, my experience with that hasn't been great. That may change in future. Just depending on what it is we're building. There may be some things that we can push out. Especially maybe the more experimental things. In my experience, just in terms of cost and development, the numbers kind of haven't stacked. I think if you can find developers that are good, which is much easier said than done. Even
you're the one with the software. You must be able to find good candidates.
Look, like we obviously have a leg up compared to others, but I'd be lying if I said that it was still easy. And partly, I'll be honest, like I'm probably a lot more picky maybe than what most are, at the same time, I appreciate it is very difficult to find people. When you've got a larger team, it's a little bit easier because if you've got a team of 20 and you bring one person in, that's only a small fraction. It's like 5% of the team, right? Whereas if there's a team of one or two people and you bring a third person in, that's 30%. So if they're not great, it has a much bigger impact. So in the early days, it's much, much, much harder, and it's very critical to find good people. We haven't, for that reason, we haven't really outsourced, because the cost benefit there, if you've got a couple of devs that are really good, can vastly outstrip what mediocre-ish developers can do, and in particular devs that aren't 100% invested, I guess you would say.
My co-founders are all in Brisbane. We all used to work physically together. Most of them come from India. Been in Australia 5-10 years. And they can't wait to go and hire a team back in India or back in Pakistan. I'm like, oh man, just keep it local.
Look, I mean, in that scenario, it may well work if they've got connections and they can kind of weed out the good and the bad ones. as a foreigner trying to evaluate it, sorry, my dog, that's my dog. As a foreigner trying to evaluate like internationally whether someone's good, like it's very difficult. But yeah.
Ben, I've got a question. So obviously you're looking to get the right candidates in the right roles, or help recruiters do that. When you make a change, how do you know if that change has actually got the right candidate in the right role, or just a candidate? So you mentioned you brought in TinderView, and that reduced their time reviewing candidates from like 20 minutes to 4. What if the end result of that had been that the wrong candidates were in roles? Do you get that feedback and feed that in?
We do.
Okay.
Through our sorry, my son's just come back. Through our platform, like we get feedback on the candidates as they progress through the process.
Okay.
In part, it's actually so that we can withhold those candidates from other customers, as it were, like make sure that they don't get sent out. If we've got a candidate that's in play with a customer, like we've got strict rules around like how they can be sent out and to whom.
All right. Well,
Which I feel is a little unique. I don't like existing. There is still an ex-recruiter presently, so I'll be cautious with what I say. But like we've seen instances where, like that same thing hasn't been applied. For us, our metric, we don't get paid when a customer places a candidate in a role. And we've done that intentionally with our pricing model to kind of avoid putting that dynamic, into the relationship. So we kind of, I won't say we don't care, but it means that, we'll happily withhold a candidate for a couple of weeks while they kind of work out, like, are they a right fit for this company? And then we'll roll them into another. And if they're in play with a customer, then, we just take them off the table and find someone else. In terms of the actual metrics and working out whether they're a fit or not, usually the way that flows through is seeing the rate at which, so one of the metrics I guess we track is like how many candidates it takes before you make one hire. And so that kind of gives us a bit of a proxy measure there in terms of like whether the candidates were a good fit or not. Before that, like there is a gate there, which is around like whether a candidate's a good fit or not. Like if a candidate, the swipe right, swipe left, not quite that, but like they can say like this person's a good fit or they're not a good fit when they're on the screen. And, like when they do that, the not a good fit one gives us feedback in terms of like immediately, like off the bat, this person was way off base, like I've asked for a Ruby dev, you've given me a Python dev, or,
Okay, as in you're putting the wrong candidates in front of them in the first place. Versus, I guess, so we, when I've done interviews or interviewed candidates before, sometimes, you think you've got the right guy, they've gone through all the interviews, they answered the questions right, they joined the company, and it might be a few weeks down the track before you see you see the real them, or you might realize, actually this guy doesn't know what he was talking about, and he could just talk. And so it's not until later that you find out this wasn't the right guy. I just wondered if you hear anything about those candidates that have been placed.
We kind of do, because we track, especially so in the early days, like we were very transactional in the way we were selling, and it was a function, I guess, of where Mike came from and my understanding of how it would work as well. So we'd effectively sell not roles, but like we'd sell into a particular role. And so it was very transactional. We'd have like a one-off relationship. We'd come in, we'd deliver candidates, they'd make a hire, they'd leave, that's it, we're done. We kind of wouldn't really see or hear from them again. These days, it's a very different relationship, but we come in and we help them out, and it's a period of at least 3 months, typically 6 to 12. Onwards. So we've got a long-term relationship with them. We kind of, at some point in there, sorry, in a similar vein to our product guy breaking up with his girlfriend, our CS guy has an exercise physiology background, aka like a personal trainer. So at some point around there, around the time we pivoted into that model, he had the insight that, hey, like it's kind of like the gym. This is kind of the same experience I had when I was trying to get people to come to the gym regularly. Like, it's all well and good them coming in and doing a session, but like really the value is in the long-term thing and them coming back repeatedly and, us engaging, and not so much around like them spending more dollars with us, but, like the longer the period that they're with us, the more benefit we can get, because we can really tune it in on what it is that they want. but yeah, we find, to your point about the interviews, just incidentally, there's no tech or business angle here, but that you may find useful. But because of the process that we've got, it's a little different because you're not coming in, the first contact with the candidate isn't in the interview stage. It's actually well before that, you know, because you're the one that's actually reaching out to them. So with the recruiter, like obviously like the recruiter goes and they do all of that and they build a relationship with the candidate. And then at some point they flick the CV over the fence to you and say, do you want to interview the person? You know, blah, 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 blah. If you're coming in through job ads, you don't have that dynamic, but it's still a little bit weird because they're coming in as a supplicant, you know, like they're like, I'm, you know, please sir, can I have a job? Like I've applied for this thing, you know, will you please see me? So the dynamic's kind of not quite right there either, you know, and really like when you're evaluating someone to come on board, like really you want to mirror the work environment as closely as you can, you know, because it's all well and good, as you said, they may well be able to talk in an interview, but like their relationship when they're in the business may well be, and their behaviors may be very different. And so it's like those two existing avenues like Seek, you know, and or job ads and recruiters, the kind of the interactions become very synthetic. Whereas, yeah, we because you're reaching out to the person and it's generally fairly passive comparatively, you know, it's like, hey, see you're in the market, like, you know, do you want to grab a coffee and have a chat? You know, that may be it, you know, and if they reply back, then, you know, you may take it further. If not, then, you know, so you get a really good sense of the person before you've actually got them in the room. So typically what we see is like once they're in the funnel, you know, it's basically a done deal. Like if they're interviewing, they generally come on board. It's not like you've got to interview like 10 people, you know, before you get one hire, you know, and with the cost and the stress of that as well, you know, having multiple people in a room, like, yeah, anyway, sorry.
There's been quite a few studies about the usefulness of interviews as a predictor of somebody's future performance. And it's very poor. There's very poor correlation between interviewing well and good job performance. I use a technique called a tryout, which is just like a sample project. Automatic, who own WordPress, I got it from them. And yeah, I let people try out on the job first. It's a much better predictor of future performance.
Yeah, we started doing coding. Well, we were kind of doing it, but they dropped off for a little while, which is when one bad egg came through. But we started doing it again because we saw the true value of them. Yeah, if you are interviewing a coder, get them to write code for you.
Yeah, one thing, like as a, I'll come at this from the other side as a developer. And like I've issued coding tests and we do use them, full disclosure, for people. But it's like, I kind of look at it as a thing that's going to filter out the bottom percentiles. You know, and to be honest, like you're not even going to really be able to tell the upper percentiles, but it's very good at weeding out the bottom percentages. And there's got to be a bit of a balance there in terms of it being too much, because the person then will come out and go, well, you know, one, I don't have time. Two, like, you know, like the dynamic still isn't quite the same as work, you know, like you're kind of still doing a test. But it, yeah, 100%. Yeah, the better, unfortunately, it's like the democracy thing. It's the worst system we've got, but it's better than all the others. Unfortunately, it's a hard problem.
I'm interested if, do you have any insight as to whether your customers are using your software to attract, to hire candidates, and at the same time using Seek and LinkedIn and a recruiter? You know, are you just a fallback, hoping, you know, they're hoping to hire somebody through you, but they've got these other channels as well, or are they exclusively using your software?
Look, I mean, it is a very competitive landscape. We do have a couple of customers that pretty well exclusively use us now, and it's taken them a while. I won't say to convince them, but you know, like they kind of got to the point where they're like, we don't actually need these other ones. Like they're superfluous. Like, you know, half the time the candidates the recruiters are passing to them are ones we've passed to them already 2 weeks prior, you know, and they've been engaging with them. We do actually have, and we started rolling out like a package. It's semi early days that like kind of wraps up the job ad thing. And so we kind of run the job ads through the same filtering process. You know, it's like a bit of a value add, because like we know, like some of our customers, they'll put a job ad up and they'll get several hundred applications that they've got to go through, which is quite painful. So like we kind of whittle that down to like 10 or so that they look at. So yeah, sorry, to answer your question directly. Yeah, we do compete often with recruiters and job ads, etc.
Right.
But you know, like that's the landscape. That's how it is. And you know, the tailwind we've got is that with a recruiter, you know, like you pay when you place. So you know, like if they place a person, it's going to cost them money. Whereas with us, like it's a lower price, and they can place as many people as they want out of
So
whatever.
is yours a subscription pricing model then?
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah.
So basically, you pay a subscription. You get a number of candidates, and then you consume those over a period of time. And like we have metrics around like how many candidates one, you know, you'll need to make one hire. It's not guaranteed, and like sometimes it can be. Some of our customers, you know, like it's astronomically high, the number of hires they make out of the candidates we give them. So like in terms of value, it's a little painful for Mike, I feel, because he's looking at it going, man, that's a lot of commissions that we could have got out of that. But then on the other hand, like they're winning. So, you know.
All right. Ben, I think that's probably a good place for us to stop for the evening.
Good stuff. Thanks, guys. Any other questions, just ping. Yeah, happy to answer and whatever.
It's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
It has been great, man.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for sharing all the stuff from the trenches.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, Ben.
Ciao.
Cheers, David.
Thanks. Cheers.